Welcome to JSON programming tutorial number 2. I hope you guys don't mind, but I've decided to extend this lesson series just a little bit, so you'll get more information from me regarding JSON server-side programming, client-side programming, and finally making JSON dynamic by using PHP to send JSON encoded data into your web applications. So in this lesson you'll learn how to create and place .json files on your live web server. Then we'll make an AJAX request that returns the JSON file data. We'll parse the data from the JSON file back in JavaScript, and we'll make sure we loop over all the incoming objects to make slim, efficient code. That way, if you have 2 objects, or maybe if you have 50 objects, just a few lines of code will bring all of those in and allow you to parse it into your web page or into your web application. And for our AJAX request, we'll be scratch coding that. There's no frameworks required. It's just a few lines of code, and a 3-year-old can do it. Okay, here's the file that we scripted in tutorial number 1. Now what I want you to do is, on your desktop, just create a new folder, and let's call that JSON_test, because we're going to have multiple files now, so we want to make sure we organize things into a folder. So just take the file that we coded in the first lesson and plop it into that folder. You go into that folder. Now we can just open that with Dreamweaver. This is the file that we made in the first lesson. Now with that file open, let's just save as JSON tutorial 2. That way you can save the first example that you were writing out, just in case you need to reference those later. So in JSON tutorial 2, you can go ahead and remove all the JavaScript. Now you want to create a new .json file, so you can go to File, New, and you can just choose HTML. I'm in Dreamweaver, but if you're in some kind of different text editor, you can create the extension you need the way that you know how within that editor that you're comfortable with. If you're in Dreamweaver, you can follow my exact steps. So I'm going to click page type HTML. I'm just going to remove all of that data, and I'm going to go to File, Save As. And you see I'm in that same folder with my JSON tutorial files. These are HTML documents, but I'm going to make sure I type in as the file name mylist.json. Save, and then I have a file called mylist.json next to my HTML files here. Now if you've ever worked with XML before, this .json file is going to work pretty much just like your .xml file would, to store and structure information in a logical way. Since this is using JavaScript syntax, we can just open our curly brace and close a curly brace. So there you have your object where your list of objects will be stored. And since we're going to have a list, we can bring this down a couple of lines. But remember in the first tutorial how we put user : and then on the other side we put the user's name. That was John. See, remember in tutorial 1, user John, that was the first piece of data in there. Actually, we could take all of that. Let's just take all of the data within that and put it right here. And I'm going to show you how you need to change the syntax just a little bit. So let's go ahead and put double quotes around all of our properties, all of the keys. I'm going to make sure we encapsulate those in double quotes, or else you'll have syntax problems when you try to load this back into your JavaScript. So that's just a very basic example, and let's press Ctrl S to save that. And back in our HTML file, we're going to now create an AJAX request that's going to call this data back into our application. Now since I need a simple AJAX request, I'm just going to go to Develop PHP and grab the raw AJAX example in the JavaScript video tutorial section. So if you go to the AJAX post to PHP file XML HTTP request object tutorial, you'll see a script down below. Grab the function. See it says function AJAX post? Grab that whole function, make sure you get the whole thing down to the closing curly brace. Press Ctrl C. Take that and paste it right here into the JavaScript element in your HTML document. Now, remove all of the comments. If you need understanding on how all of this works, in this video tutorial I explain every line in depth. So don't tell me you don't understand how AJAX works. You just failed to watch the video. Take time and watch this video right here and you'll understand every single line. But we're not going to need all this crap, so we can get rid of the comments, and I'm going to show you how much it slims down. Just get rid of all those comments because they're not needed for the application to run. They're just there for understanding, but like I said, you want to understand how all this works? Go ahead and watch that video, buddy. Alright, so this URL variable, we can just take that and actually put it in place where the open method is set here. See that URL variable? Let's just put that in place there and remove this line. We don't need that. We can change that to mylist.json. Okay, mylist.json, and you're going to change post to get. So we're going to use the get method instead of post. Now here where we have variables, we don't need this first name variable, that last name variable, or the vars variable. We can just get rid of those. Now here where it says vars in the send method of the AJAX request, we're going to put null because we're not sending any variables. Now let's change this where it says content type from form URL encoded, change that to say JSON simply. So content type is application JSON, and let's just make the asynchronous true. That's the third parameter that you need with an AJAX request. I mean, it's not necessary, it's an optional parameter, but we're going to use it in this case and set it to true. Now the last thing we need to do is change this to results, because that's the name of the div that I'm going to have in the page. So change status to results, and now in the body, let's put a div and make sure the ID is equal to results. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and comment this HR response text variable, because we're going to need that, and we're going to use the json.parse method upon that data. So actually we can get rid of this line too, and we'll put something else in there in a minute. So really that's the slimmed down version of the AJAX request, and we changed it up a little bit from what it was for the post mechanism that it was serving at develop PHP when we're sending data to PHP here and getting it back. So this is a post request, and then for getting our JSON data, we're going to use a get AJAX request. And we just changed the content type from URL encoded to application JSON. Now, anytime that you want to fire off this AJAX post, actually let's change that to say AJAX get JSON, because that makes more sense. So the function AJAX get JSON, whenever that is called to run, it will fire off this AJAX request and bring your JSON data back in, and you can parse it. So what I'm going to do is just grab this starting script element. I'm going to go into my body under my div results. I'm going to put in that script element, make sure I close it, and then I can just copy this right here. And what this will do is fire off that function. It'll make this function run. Okay, so as you guys know, when you if ready state equals 4 and HR status equals 200, that means the information has come back from your server-side data through the AJAX request. So here you have actual access to that information from the external file. So what we'll do is create a variable called data, and that's going to be equal to the HTTP requests response text. But before we just pack that into the data variable, we want to use the json.parse method upon it. So type in json.parse, and what this does is it helps get it ready for JavaScript parsing. So once we have the information from the external file packed into a variable called data, the next line we want to create a variable that represents this results div here. So we can actually take this and we'll put it up here. Var results is equal to document.getElementById results. That way anytime we want to talk to that div through JavaScript, all we have to do is reference the results variable name. And let's change this to say requesting. Remember, this is just going to be what the div says while the data is loading on the server, and it'll be just a split second. The user will see the words requesting ... and then all your server-side data will come pouring into your application in just a split second. And actually this is where you can put an image tag to have maybe a little fan loader or any kind of animated GIF, animated.gif loader. You can replace those words with an actual animated GIF to make things cooler. And the animated GIF will display to people while data is being requested server-side. Okay, now the things that we learned in lesson 1 are going to come in handy now. So let's look at mylist.json. You can see we have one object, and it has its different key value pairs, or its properties and their values. So we have property user, age, and country, and respective values for all of those things. So what I'm going to do is attempt to pull in the user's name, their age, and their country back in my web document through this data object that has run through the json.parse method. So let's say results.innerHTML is equal to data, and remember the dot notation that we learned in the first lesson? Let's say user right there. So what should happen when we run this application on our server is we execute the AJAX request, and when the data is back from the AJAX request to the server side file of mylist.json, then it will throw into the results div some information, and we can evaluate that. And we got to make sure that we get the user, which is named John. So when we test this, we should see in this div, results div, the word John be put in. And if you see the word John, then you have a successful little test. But we'll show you how to go a little more in depth. But we got to test this first on our actual live server online. Okay, so I'm using my actual adamcorey.com website for this test, and you got to make sure that you're online on your live web server. You can't test this locally and expect it to work. For most of you, it's not going to work locally. So you guys have to load these files onto your web server. I'm going to type in the name of the folder that they're in. Mine was in demo JSON, and the name of the file was JSON tutorial2.html, and I have mylist.json in the same folder with it online. So I'm going to press enter now, and I should see the word John. See? For a split second it said requesting ... then John. I'll refresh it and look really close. You'll see the word requesting. Just for a split second you see the word requesting. That's how fast that online live data transmission is. It's so split second. But it takes a little longer the more data that you load in. So if we look at mylist.json, we can get all of that data out there using the same dot notation that we learned in the first video. So you can write a sentence like this: says data.user is data.age and lives in data.country. And we load that up to our live web server and test. So if we refresh the page now, see, John is 22 and lives in United States. Now you're using JSON as it is intended to grab server-side data. Now remember in the first lesson where we had 3 different users, in mylist.json we only have really one user. It's only really one object worth of data. So what you can do is set up multiple data objects within here. So let's go ahead and type in double quote, let's call it U1, and then we're going to put in our colon, remember, and the value for U1 goes on the right of the colon, and what that's going to be is its own object. So you put curly braces around those as well. And if you're in Dreamweaver and it says there's a syntax error on line 1 blah blah blah, don't worry about that syntax error warning, because I don't think Dreamweaver is even equipped and set up to check the validity of a .json file. So let's go ahead and bring this down one line with a couple of spaces there, and let's bring this down to about right there. Now to put the second user in place, remember in the first lesson we had user or object 1, 2, and 3 to represent John, Will, and Abiel. We're going to use U1, U2, U3, just like we used in tutorial 1 when we packed all of them into object 4. Right here, U1, U2, U3. So we'll just copy this line, and we'll make sure that we put a comma after this one. Put another one there, comma, another one there, and on the last one, don't put a comma. So basically, inside of your main object, you have 3 objects nested within it. So you change this one to U2 and this one to U3. This user was Will. This user was Abiel. And what were their ages? 27 and 19. So let's just put those there. 27, 19. And Will was from United Kingdom, and Abiel was from Mexico. And that's it, my friends. Now you understand how to set up a larger list. And this can be 50 items, it can be 100 items, and it doesn't have to be people or users like I'm using. It could be any kind of items you want. You could make a list, the source for image files. It could be a gallery. You can pretty much load in a whole image gallery using a .json file, just like you would use an XML file to load an image gallery or a gallery full of images. Now back in our application, to make this read that same sentence again, actually let's look at my list. Let's try to get Will, who's 27, from United Kingdom. Let's pull all of his data out, and what we'll have to do is say data.u2.user, data.u2.age, and data.u2.country. So you can see this set up in our JSON file. The reason why we have to signify U1, U2, and U3 is because we have more of a deeply nested object that we're parsing. Okay, so press save and then put that on your server. And make sure you also FTP your mylist.json. So you got to FTP your JSON tutorial.html and your mylist.json. Make sure you replace both of those on your live server. And we refresh, and we got Will is 27, lives in United Kingdom. Great. Now let's say I have a list that looks something like this, where there's a lot more users and a lot more items in it. So you can see I have U1 through U12, and inside there's John, Will, Abiel, Rick, Susan, Amy, Pete, Chris, Lou, all kind of other people, and their ages and their countries as well. So in the file, if I have 12 people, I'd have to load in this line 12 times, once for each user. And what if my list had 100 items in it, 100 users? That means I'd have to write this line 100 times to throw the data into my web application. So in order to make it smarter, we're going to show you a loop. And what the loop will allow you to do is run through all of these objects and parse them into your application using just a few lines. Let's just comment that out for now. And right under that line, let's create a for loop. Open close parentheses, open a curly brace, and go down a couple of lines and close the curly brace. Now in the for loop, you want to type in var obj in data. So for each variable object in data, we're going to run this loop for each of those items. So that's what that means. For each one of the objects within, that's how many times this loop is going to run, and it's going to pass over each one. So if we get the results.innerHTML variable here, what we'll do is we'll just say plus equals right there. And that will allow us to compound many things, a lot of HTML into that container. If you just put an equal there, each item or each object will overwrite the one you put in before it. So you put plus equals, and that will compound it, and the value would go there. Now to get the username for each one of those objects, let's type in data, open a square bracket, close the square bracket, and in between your square brackets type in the obj variable, which was created right here through the loop for each object that comes passing through, dot user. And that will pull the username dynamically, is in my list. And then you can just put an HR or a break. We'll just put a BR. So actually, if you're using a plus equal there, the requesting word will stay in. So let's go ahead and uncomment this line and just make it blank. That way this will just effectively empty out this word requesting ... before the for loop is able to populate it with real data. Okay, so make sure you save that, and we're going to FTP it up to the server and see what we get. So here I am at my test page online, and I'm going to refresh. You see, I only got 3 because I didn't FTP my list like I should. Okay, now I'll refresh with the new list up. Up in the list, I have syntax errors because I didn't put a comma behind these when I pasted them in. You just got to make sure that there's a comma behind each of these except the last one. So each of these little independent objects, put a comma behind each one. Make sure you save that, then FTP that. Okay, refresh, and there we go. There's everybody in the list. So John all the way to Greg is in the list. And then back in here, you can basically set up this HTML any way you want. We'll make it just like the first sentence. User is, right here we'll put double quote, in between double quotes, 2 plus signs, and we'll put data.object.age right here. Make sure this says age. And we're going to do a similar thing here. And lives in space plus dot country. And then past that we'll put another plus sign, and we'll just put a horizontal rule to separate each person. So save this, FTP it up to your website, go to your live testing page, and refresh. And there you go. Now that's a good bit of data that came in very lightning fast. Look how lightning fast that is. You can't even almost see the word requesting. It happens so fast. But that is data that's not within your application that you're calling in from the server. Okay. Now what we're going to do is probably get into the PHP side of things and show you the real powerful dynamics of using something like this. Just like in some previous tutorials where I showed you guys how to use XML dynamically through PHP. We're going to show you how to use JSON data dynamically through PHP. So this static list that you see here will be rendered dynamically through database results and things like that, making it really ultra powerful.